So, in our life quest that we've had in this class, we've covered everything from getting a job, getting a budget, buying a house, buying a car, getting insurance, health insurance. We've covered everything that I consider to be life and life events. We are now to the retirement planning stage. And of course, the key I'm going to tell you is to start early, but also to broaden your horizons of the types of plans that are out there. Almost all the time, all you ever hear about is a 401k. There are other kinds of investments out there for you if you're self employed, with a corporation, as an individual. And so I want to be sure we kind of touch base on all of those so you have some good working knowledge of that. Um, and of course, the key is to start early. The earlier, as we know from the compound interest chapter, the earlier you start saving, the quicker you can double your income and or triple it or whatever. So it's better to start early, even just a small amount if you can. So, a lot of times when we get into retirement planning and you try to talk to people about it, this, by the way, is kind of my bailiwick. This is where I've worked 90% of my career, I guess, with retirement planning and in the retirement planning arena. So, if I go too far off track or something, we're not in a classroom for you to wave me down, but I'll try to stop myself and not go too in depth on everything. But the one thing that you run into with uh, people looking at retirement and thinking about retirement is thinking that your expenses will drop when you retire. um, they always say when they like when you take out your retirement income that you've set aside, there you're predicting also to be in a lower tax bracket. The lower tax bracket is relatively this is relatively still a good thing to predict because hopefully you are in a lower tax bracket by the time you hit that point. You're not, amassing homes and boats and cars and uh, six-figure jobs and all those kind of things. So, but people always think, well, my expenses will drop because I won't have to commute to work. I could get by on one car. They make all these assumptions. Well, that's true. You can make those changes, but retirement it used to be when people retired, they retired at 65. Back in the old days, as I always say, they would retire at 65, and then 9 times out of 10, the lifespan was so much shorter, they died at 75. So there was just 10 years of that to enjoy retirement. So we always had the joke when I was in school of, I wish we could retire at 20 and go to work at 60. That would be a lot more fun, which that would be. If they let us make the rules, maybe we could do that. But thinking that your expenses will drop is kind of a misconception. You hope you don't have major house payments. You hope you don't have car payments. You hope you don't have all these things. But because we're living longer and because we're working longer and because we're doing things longer into life now and going past 75 and in most things that we're doing, a lot of us are entering retirement with house payments still, or we may have just bought a new home, or you may have downsized, or something. So you have a house payment. You think you'll get by on one car. Well, we haven't gotten by with one car yet. Why would we start now? If you're a family, if you're a grandparent taking care of grandkids at that stage, you need a car with 4 doors. You need to be able to get a car seat in, all those kind of things. So expenses can drop, but that's kind of a misconception that they will drop. Also thinking that retirement only lasts 15 years. Again, they expected you to die within 10 to 15 years of retirement. That's not the case. We're living to 100 pretty easy, into our 90s very easy. And quite a few used to be a real rarity to have somebody hit 100. Now it's a real rarity for them to hit 107. I mean, so we've shifted. Our dynamics have shifted. So retirement's got to last from 65 to 95. It's got to last 30 years, at least when you're looking at stuff. Um, Also, in the olden days, they could depend on Social Security. That was the only retirement plan they had. Employers did not have them. A few did way back in the day, like the railroad companies. A couple of the car industries had them. Coal miners had them. Some of those industries that were the old startup things, they had some kind of a retirement plan for their employees. But most everyone else depended only on Social Security. And then they had Social Security and their company pension if they had, and that will take care of paying for all your basic expenses. That may or may not be the case, depending on how much you've saved with your retirement plan. If you have we'll get into that, but if you have a true company pension plan, um, then you might have a fixed income from them. And if that's the case, that's a huge plus and feather in your cap. Social Security, of course, is on the bargaining table with every administration of whether they're going to cut it or not. I fully don't think they will. I think there'd be such an uprising because so many people rely on Social Security and are on Social Security that that would be a no-brainer, but they're going to have to figure something out for sure. So why do retirement planning? Why do we even care? Why even think about it? Well, because you want to have your retirement increase and keep up with inflation. We talked about doing investing, and you want to keep up with inflation, keep up or beat. The same thing with your retirement planning. You're setting aside dollars. Those dollars have got to grow to be worth spendable dollars. This is where that calculation comes into play. You're putting them aside when you're in your 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, and you want them to be worth something when you're in your 60s. Well, that's 30, 40 years down the road. Inflation at 2% a year, you've had quite a bit of growth there. Currently, inflation's at 4, so you got to keep up a higher thing there. So those things are just kind of things we have to keep about. We want it to keep pace with inflation. Thinking that your employer's health insurance plan and Medicare will cover all your medical expenses. If you can keep your employer's health plan, that's great. And that with Medicare probably would cover all your medical expenses. Not all employers offer some kind of coverage when you turn 65. So you may just have Medicare and then a private market insurance. And so that may not cover as much as you think it will. Um, so again, you'd be out of pocket expenses. There's plenty of time to start saving for retirement. That is the biggest thing you hear, especially when we had a few of the hospitals around the state that we did their retirement plans for them. Those young employees, you could see them going, oh, number one, I'm not going to be here that long. Number two, I'm just 25. There's no reason for me to start saving now. And you'd get to the point, you'd come back 5 or 10 years later, they were still there and they'd moved up in the job and they had just now started retirement planning. If they'd started that first 5 to 10 years that they were there, they would be already into the game and further along than they were at this point. And thinking just having a little bit on your account won't help you much. Every little bit helps. So everything that you can. Now, I've teased you that I could sound like your parents or grandparents 90% of the time when I tell you the rules of budgeting and the rules of spending money and all that kind of stuff. You can always call me your buzzkill person. But looking at the trade-offs, and again, this is going to sound like your parents or your grandparents, and I apologize. If you buy state-of-the-art home equipment systems now, if you buy expensive cars, if you take extravagant vacations now, you may not have as much money when you get ready to retire. Now, I'm not saying don't expect to retire because I don't know what your job's going to be. It could be that that lifestyle fits your job and you still have money for retirement. Just remember to be setting that money aside for retirement. So you get some tax breaks for doing that too. So just be sure that you're participating in anything that can save for retirement. Now you may not be able to carry those. The theory of this is if you buy big and extravagant now, you don't have that extra cash, but that extra cash to retirement. Again, I don't know your job. I don't know what you're going to be doing. You may be able to do both of those. But in the books format, this is where that trade off comes in. If you buy big stuff now, you probably won't have a lot to retire on when you get there. Only saving now and having a comfortable current spending habit can ensure that you'll have a comfortable retirement later. And the theory behind that is just if you know how to rein things in, not buy the biggest and the best, and not go on a spending spree every other weekend, you probably are going to have pretty good habits. And by having good habits, you can have your money in retirement go further and go longer. And so that's where that theory comes in on that. And then 75% of workers expect to live as well as they currently are, if not better, when they get to retirement. But the truth is, only about 20% have of those 75% that think they're going to live that way have not started saving, have only started saving for retirement. So if only 20% are saving for retirement, that's another 55%. Quick math in my head, huh? 55% that aren't saving for retirement. If they're not saving for retirement, they may not be able to live comfortably in retirement. So it's just that thing of, we had the chapter where we talked about compound interest and how it grows, and even $10 now becomes, $10,000 and those kind of things. So just knowing that anything that you can set aside is going to help you down the road is where this philosophy comes into play. To drive this point home one more time, if you start at 25, from age 25 to 65, say you just did $300 a month. If you could earn a 9% return, which they say the stock market on average has a 10% return, If you could get that, if you can get a 9% return average at age 65, you have $1.4 million to retire. So what seems like a small amount now with the right investing and the right growth can become a very, very nice retirement income. And that, I'm sure, if we ran figures and inflected uh, inflation in there and added growth and all this stuff, you'd still be, that still would be as comfortable a retirement as it would sound now. So just keep in mind. Plus, you'd have the bragging rights of saying you're a millionaire, you know. So just keep in mind that it doesn't take a lot, just start. If you waited 10 years and started at 35, age 35, that 300 a month then becomes only 550,000 at age 65. So you can see by waiting 10 years, that cuts basically your benefits, your retirement accumulation in half. So keep that in mind. That's why I say start early, start early, start early. I'll also tell you, and it'll be reiterated in the slides and as we go through it, but if you have an employer that has a retirement plan and you've just started your job and you don't have a lot of extra income laying around because you've just done your budget thing, your budget project, and realize by the time you pay for everything, you don't have a whole lot left over. If you can look at, if they have a 401k plan, usually they have a put in a minimum percent and we will match that percent, whatever their matching is, maybe a half a percent, a full percent, 2% to 1%, whatever. If you can put in and they match it, put in the bare minimum of what they will match. That way, at least you're getting that addition to your retirement right off the top of the bat. So it's growing without ever earning a dollar. So just keep in mind, if you can't, fathom, I can't set aside, blah, blah, blah. And I get it. I've been there. I've had the starting income salary. I've had the thing where you pay all your bills and you go, okay, well, it's the middle of the month and I have $15 to last the rest of the month. What am I going to do? So I get it. I totally get it. Um, so trying to figure out how to do that. But if you can just set aside anything, it's better than setting aside nothing. So just keep that in mind. If you wait 20 years, don't start at age 25, you start at age 45, and you save that same $300 a month, you'll only have $201,000 at age 65. So you can see the part of procrastination really doesn't help you a whole lot. So in this, you need to start early. It's very important. And then people are spending at least 16 to 30 years in retirement, which is what we just talked about. So you've got to keep that in mind too. Um, they're finding with a lot of retirees, you have Walmart greeters and you wonder why they're there. It's probably because they can't afford to live in retirement. Social Security and private pension plans are not usually sufficient to cover the cost of living in retirement. And especially if it's not paying your salary, if it's not a true, what I call a true pension plan, which we'll get into, that's paying your salary or a portion of your salary in your retirement, if you've invested it and it's in a 401k and the stock market's going up and down, there's months that it may not be a lot coming out to you. So you've got to keep that in mind. And so you may have to get a part-time job. You may have to be a greeter at Walmart. You may have to do DoorDash delivery. I mean, we've had all those things. And then if you throw in there a big life event like major surgery or something that insurance didn't cover, you don't have that income coming in every day to pay those bills, so you have to find another job. So we're finding that older people are waiting to retire, first of all, to keep building retirement instead of walking out at 65. And then you find also that people that are older that have been in retirement for a while have to get a part-time job to help keep up with what the expenses are. And of course, inflation may make a problem with that too. If you have some years, the years back when we had 10% inflation, there were a lot of elderly working because that 10% inflation, no retirement plan was keeping up with that. So that can make it very difficult too. So just keep in mind that that may be what you need to do. Again, it's never too early. This is a chart that shows kind of the same thing of just how it will grow. If you set aside, so much starting young and even at a 4% rate, if you don't get 9, if you don't get 10, it still grows, and you can see what a difference it makes. Of course, the power of compound interest, we've talked about that. So as this said, for every 10 years that you delay, it drops. And we saw that with our examples of setting aside 300 now, you become a millionaire. 300 in 10 years, you become, a half a millionaire. In 330 years or in 20 years, then you become, even less. You have even less to retire on. So, and it's very hard when you're young. Retirement, I mean, you think of age 65 when you're in your 20s, and that's like 100 years from now. Of course, if you do the math, it's not, but it seems so far away, and I get it. I was there. I understand, and I worked in this business, and I still understand. Um, so just keep in mind that it comes quicker than you think. You can ask your parents or your grandparents, did retirement come really quickly, or did age 65 come really quickly, or age 40, or age 50, or whatever you're thinking is so far away. And then, of course, if you're older and you're taking this class, then you understand, you've been through that. You understand how quickly 30 gets here, and you think, well, that's 10 years I didn't start saving. And then all of a sudden you're in the throes of, a lot of times in our 30s, that's when we're buying homes and buying cars and having kids. And so you've got all those strains on your budget. So that you think, oh, I'll put it off till I'm 40. And it just is amazing what a difference that can make. So before you start retirement planning, first thing to do is look at your assets and liabilities. We always go back to that. See what you have, see what your net worth is, see where you can start from. Estimate your spending needs and adjust them for inflation. That gives you a starting point. So if you figure out what your current assets and liabilities are and your net worth now, then you can kind of bring that forward. You can estimate your spending needs for inflation in the future, and then figure out what you've got planned retirement income. Now, Social Security will send you a statement every year as you work, and tell you what you should have in retirement. Now that's going to grow because every year that you work, you're going to have money going in. So that's kind of a moving target. Your retirement plan at work is probably going to be kind of that same moving target, but just kind of evaluate what you think you're going to need. If you took your expenses today and added 2% a year compound interest, or what, just to do a flat interest rate, just to do that 2% a year, even that, and try to figure out what your expenses today would be worth in 20 or 30 or 40 years, can kind of give you an idea what your expenses would be, so you'd figure out what you need to make for retirement. And then, of course, if you need to increase your income by working part time, or working a separate job, or picking up something on the weekend, or working overtime. I can remember when I worked at the bank, I worked a lot of overtime because I handled retirement plans for companies that the bank had. And then I handled the self directed IRAs that went into the stock market. And of course, those you had to get when they came in and talked to you and wanted to get a buy order in, you had to execute that right away. So a lot of my day was spent taking care of the people that were self-directing their IRAs. And so to do all the other stuff, it would take me at night, and I'd work a lot of overtime. It was great. Well, then they promoted me, and I put that in air quotes, to an officer of the bank, and I no longer counted for overtime, which was great. I was an officer of the bank, had a few more responsibilities, had a title, it was kind of nice, but I no longer had that edge to be able to work overtime. So, you just kind of have to think about it. Is there a way for you to make some extra money if you need it? And again, it's never too late to start. Let me just reemphasize that: 100 ways we can do it. Um, of course, you can look at retiring later if you realize that you're not going to have enough money. You can take a second job, which we just talked about. You may need to redefine your goal or refine your goal. Instead of having a $40 million house on the lake, maybe look at a $1 million house on the river, or something that would make a difference. Make use of your home, build equity in your home, keep it and grow it, and then that way you have equity. My parents had built a house. That's a long story. You don't want to get into all that. But anyway, they had built a house, and then they decided at one point they had 3 acres they were trying to manage, and they were in their 70s, and they started thinking about retirement and et cetera, and they looked at downsizing. And by the equity that they had in their house, and by buying something that was smaller, and it wasn't ridiculously smaller, they bought a very nice place, they were able to just pay cash for it outright and not have a house payment. So that worked out really well for that stage of retirement. So just keep in mind that you can do something like that. Look at your assets, of course. Housing, if you own it, it's your biggest asset. If you could sell your home and buy a less expensive one, and invest the difference, that may make you some money along the way too. There also are, if you ever can't sleep at night, there's always the reverse mortgages, ads on TV. They can provide extra income, and how they work is, they work by taking your mortgage, or taking your home basically. They then do a mortgage on it, or a equity loan on it. They end up paying you an annuity, a monthly and a monthly premium, they now own your home. So you lose that as an asset when you do your assets minus liabilities, something to keep in mind. And then they pay you a monthly income until you pass away. When you pass away, then that house is theirs to sell. And it's not in your estate or anything like that. It can work for some people. I'm sort of against them just because you do lose the asset of having your house. It might be better for you to get the home equity loan yourself, um, and take the cash and then pay the mortgage back. But, again, it works for some people and it sounds very appealing for some people, and I can't knock that because we all make different decisions. But again, you do lose that asset. So there's fees, there's closing costs, there's things like that have to be um, paid. They normally will take care of paying those, but you pay for the opening thing to do the reverse mortgage, that kind of thing. Interest rates, some of them are fixed, some of them are not. You want to be sure if you if you do one, make sure that the interest rate is fixed if you can possibly work it out. Interest on the mortgage is not deductible on your income taxes because you're not making the interest payments, they are. So it's not anything that's in your assets or your wheelhouse to take care of. And you're still responsible for property taxes, for insurance, for utilities, maintenance, and any other expenses. They're just holding the mortgage. So it doesn't alleviate you from all home debts or home issues, but it does sort of give you a cash flow on your income on that. I had one set of friends that their mom had done that. They did not know that. But she was a long time widower, and anyway, that was it worked out to be, she felt like the best thing for her to get that kind of cash. And then, like I said, when she passed away, the house did not it was not concluded in the assets. They didn't have to put it up for sale, anything like that. The people that held the mortgage on it came in and they took over for that, so that took care of that. And they said overall that was okay for them. They didn't have a problem. They had, of course, cleaned it out with her stuff, but and then, of course, if your spouse has not signed the loan agreement, your spouse may not get any money from the reverse mortgage. So, if you're married and in the middle of the night you can't sleep and you follow the ad and you call and you don't put your spouse in there, it could be that it's just a reverse mortgage for you. Again, it's not one of your assets, so you leave less for your heirs. It's your choice on whether that's a big deal or not to you on that. Again, it gives cash, so that's usually the biggest drawing card. Life insurance, you've got cash values sometimes that can be converted to an annuity and maybe pay you a monthly income, or you've got cash you can maybe withdraw. If you have term life insurance, you don't have those cash options. Um, so that can make a difference too, but there could be some additional income in that. Of course, other investments that you have, maybe you've got something, maybe you're in a bunch of stocks that don't pay dividends. Maybe shift those to dividend paying. That way you've got income coming in. Maybe we talked about bonds, will give you interest every 6 months. Maybe get a bond that'll give you some interest coming in. So there's some ways to kind of look at what you have and do that. Here's a worksheet that the book gives us. You don't have to really do anything. They're just basically telling you to review your assets, liabilities, and net worth. How much is in the checking account, running through all your assets, house, the equity in it, furniture and appliances. So there is a question on the exam, to calculate again liabilities, assets minus liabilities equals net worth. So just remember that formula is still in there, even though this test only covers these 2 chapters, and that's a throwback. That's still in here. So that's what they're looking at here, is trying to figure out what your net worth is. If if you should get divorced, I was going to say if unfortunately, sometimes it's fortunately for divorces, but anyway, if you should get married and then get divorced, there are things to consider. Any retirement plan benefits that you both have earned while married can be split 50-50. You may decide to keep them yourselves. Assets are split 50 to 50. So when somebody says they're going to get half my retirement, you have to think of, well, it's all assets are split 50-50, and they may not touch your retirement, but you just make up for it in another way and pay them, all of the house or something like that. So um, pension benefits can be attachable even if you haven't retired. They can be carved out and given to a spouse. They may be entitled to, if they haven't worked or if their Social Security is less than yours and you've been married 10 years, they're entitled to half of your Social Security. So that can make a difference in that planning also. Um, Looking at your spending patterns can make a difference when you're trying to plan for retirement also. If you buy everything the minute you see it, we may need to tweak that. as you get closer to retirement. If not, just make sure you've got cash coming in to cover those. Um, do you always have to buy it immediately? Do you have to, um, are you a smart shopper, a savvy shopper, look for the best buy shopper? If you are, those things don't have to change when you hit retirement. So, that's where that can come in. Some expenses that may go down can be like work expenses. Pay less for gas, lunches out. My husband retired last year, and we've laughed about how few times he's filled up his car since he's retired. I mean, he was filling it up usually once a week. He got a commuter car, because he drove from Fayetteville to the north side of Springdale, and he wasn't worried about size or luxury or anything. It was just basically a commuter car. But now that he's not doing that, he's put like 3 tanks of gas in it since he retired last year. So those things can add up pretty quickly when you're not doing that. Or you may move more into town when you retire and downsize, and you have less gas there. If you always have lunches out, that may change when you're retired. You may not have them all out. You may just have some, that kind of thing. Clothing expenses change. You may become the new retiree in the sweatsuits kind of person. And if that's the case, your clothing expenses go way down. You may wear tennis shoes everywhere you go. That may make a difference in your work shoes. So clothing expenses could be definitely different for that. Housing expenses, of course, you still have to be responsible for your mortgage if it's not paid off. Taxes and insurance may go up because they do rise with the cost of living and as the value of your house appreciates. So those may continue to increase. Sometimes in some states that pay property taxes, they will have something they can lock in if you're at retirement age or have retired, and not have these drastic increases go up each month. So it's worth checking. So you might be able to hold one of those down. You can't change the house when they don't give you credit for being old for your house appreciating, but that would do. And then of course your federal income taxes will probably be lower because you don't have that salary that you're drawing from work. The benefits that you're receiving from retirement plans are considered taxable. Social Security is their favorite thing to bounce around with. It has not been taxable income. It has been taxable income. So that's not a guarantee of where that's going to fall in that. But anyway, you may have to have taxes withheld from it, or you may just want to pay estimated taxes on it. Your insurance, or your health insurance may increase depending on if you have Medicare and a private policy. You may have premiums if you just have Medicare. You may have some out-of-pocket expenses, medical expenses. Of course, they increase as we get older because we have little things that go wrong, or we need to have something taken care of. So you may have some out-of-pocket expenses that you weren't planning on. And then leisure activities may go up too, because this is the time of your life. You can go travel, you can do things. So you may have more expenses for that than you had when you were working. Your gifts and contributions may increase, they may decrease, depending on how your salary is. You may decide to give more to charities, and you may decide to give less because you don't have enough to share. So you can do that. This chart just is something you can fill in to kind of get an idea of what your monthly expenses are, and then what you expect them to be in retirement, just to kind of give you a ballpark of where you're headed with that. So not something that you have to do when you start your retirement planning, but something that you might think about when you get closer to retirement to look at. This, of course, is the effects of inflation. This was done by TIAA CREF, and it shows that in 10 years the effects of inflation would be $6,800. In 30 years, maybe 3,083. And that has to do with how inflation is affecting you and how much out of pocket you're paying, and why you might need to reduce some of your expenses to try to cover those things that you're doing. Okay. Think about where you want to live. Think about the kind of house you want to have in retirement. Those things can make a difference. You may decide to be one of those that moves to Florida and gets a condo on the beach, and you live your perfect life on the beach. You may decide to get a mountain cabin and do that. You may just decide to downsize, and you may decide not to move at all. So, totally up to you, but there are choices sometimes that you can look at. Um, of course, staying in your own home may be easier because you know what the expenses are, but you may decide you want to, get out of town, don't want to live here, may want to move where the kids are. I mean, there's all kinds of things that people do. And if you do change houses, of course, always be sure you still read everything. If you have gray hair, you get discriminated against on a lot of things, or they make assumptions. So just keep in mind, even friends of mine that prematurely grayed at 30, got treated differently than the rest of us at 30 because they thought they were old. Like, here, sir, can I help you? Or this is what this is saying if you can't understand it, kind of speech. So just know that you may get that treatment, ignore it because you won't be that person, hopefully, and just, go ahead and read everything and make sure that what you're signing is what you're signing, especially if you're changing houses. You don't want to get stuck in something that, you signed up for a condo living and you have to be out of the condo 6 months a year so they can rent it out or something, kind of thing. Um, keep up with taxes. Of course, the tax laws change when we're working. We kind of hear things a little more. You're reading periodicals, you're keeping up with stuff. Um, Retired people, I think, still are very savvy and keep up. Almost everyone that we work with, it's retirement age, is not falling into this trap. But sometimes when people retire, um, they're not keeping up anymore. So just if you're going to be that person, then make sure you've got somebody you can call, like a CPA or an attorney, to say, hey, tell me, um, what taxes, what benefits do I get? Like, they just passed a thing this last year. I think we discussed it on the car thing, where you could buy an American made car and get a deduction on your taxes. Well, if you need a new car, that might prompt you to look at something different, depending on your tax situation. So, and if you're changing locations, and I would recommend this anywhere, jobs at 20, retirement at 65, maybe rent somewhere first, and then buy, just because that way you can check out the area, you can see where you want to live, you can kind of get a feel for the neighborhood. Hopefully rent where you think you want to buy, but if there's an option there, and that way you can kind of test the waters, so to speak, and find out if it's really what you want. Social Security is our most prominent known retirement income that's out there. It covers actually about 97% of the workers that are out there. So you can see that it's definitely the one that everybody has. It's meant to be now a part of your retirement income. Unfortunately, with Social Security, they did not keep up with the benefits as wages change. So a lot of the benefit tables, if you go back to the 80s and 90s, are about the same benefit table. So, because of that, they've anticipated that you need to supplement that. So, a lot more employers offer retirement plans now, and there's a lot more options out there for you for retirement plans, IRAs, Roth IRAs, et cetera, that you can set up. So it's not, they don't want you to necessarily think all you're going to get is your Social Security income. They want you to do some saving and contribute to that also. There is a calculator online that you can estimate your benefits with Social Security Administration. There's a link there if you want to follow it. Most people won't qualify at age 62. They'll tell you that if you um, take it early, you're missing so many years of benefits and you won't have an increase. If you want to retire at 62 and take your income, don't fall into that trap. It is better the longer you wait. Yes, you do get more benefits. But there's always the argument of, we don't know how long we're going to live. We don't know what health will be in 5 to 6 years. We don't know a lot of things in the future. So if you want to retire at 62 and they make you feel guilty that you're taking your retirement early, ignore them. Because most of the times when we've run pencil and paper calculations to figure out if you take it at 62 or if you take it at 65 or 66 or 68, whatever the new retirement age is, if you take it at the later date, yes, you have more dollars, but you also have sometimes, you've lost, you have to factor in, loss of time that was free. You have to factor in, um, and and just even on a straight math calculation, when you do that and figure out, I'm getting it now and I'm getting it for so many years, and then, or I could get more, you still come out about the same to go ahead and get it now with a lesser amount and earn it for 5 more years than you do waiting for the bigger amount in 5 years. So just know that if you want to retire at 62 and you want to take it, go for it. I'm not going to be the one to tell you not to do that, because like I said, we don't know the future. You don't know how long you're going to take it. And again, when you put pencil to paper and you calculate, I earned $3,000 at age 62 versus 4,500 at age 67. 3,000 a month for those 5 years. Yeah, I have to do math in my head. Sorry, for those 5 years may work out to be about the same or better than if you just waited to 5 years for the higher amount. So just keep that in mind. Widows and widowers can begin collecting Social Security earlier. Um, about 4 months before you want to get your Social Security benefits, you need to apply. You can call the office, you can make an appointment and see them locally, or you can apply online. You can set up your own Social Security account, pull in everything, and do it online. And I will tell you that I've helped people do it online, and it's overall pretty easy. Now, I've had friends that have done it without my help, I might add, and they hated it online. But I think overall it's pretty easy to do that online. So I think all of y'all would probably be well versed enough to do that online. But if not, you can go in and make an appointment with them. And especially if you've got something questionable, like you're going to take spouse's Social Security, you want to look at it from when you were married and now you're divorced. You want to get the best and the highest benefit that you can. So you want to be sure. And I know when my parents went in, they made an appointment because they weren't computer savvy. So they made an appointment and went in, and that they could pull up what my mom would have gotten, what my dad got with mom getting half, what mom got with half, those kind of things. And they made their decision that way to know what was the best for them. So that's what you want to be sure of too. And payments don't start unless you apply for them. Excuse me. If you're 68, still working and don't apply for Social Security, that check's not going to come in the mail on the 68th birthday. So you have to say, I want this, and you have to apply. You will need proof of your age. You'll need a Social Security card, of course, and your number. Your most recent W-2 or tax return to fill out information that they need. A marriage license if you're applying for spouse's benefits. Birth certificates of your children applying for benefit if you're getting children's benefits for them. And then proof of citizenship if you were not born in the U.S. So it's good to know you need all those things when you go in or when you get online. Um, when to start receiving, we just kind of covered that. Estimating your benefits, you've got a calculator for that. How to become eligible, you just turn older. That's really all there is to it to become eligible. And then if you work after you retire, that question comes up a lot because you have to start receiving benefits. I believe this year it's at age 72 or 73. And you may be working a great job and want to work till you fall over. If that's the case, you can do that. If you take Social Security and continue to work, they will adjust your benefits. And by adjust, it doesn't necessarily mean you get less. It just means that if you're making more income, your benefits may go up. Because they'll recalculate what you're due because you're still having Social Security taxes withheld. So your benefit actually increases that way. So just keep that in mind that if you work after retirement, you can still have benefits increase. They increase automatically currently with cost of living. They call that COLA. But it's not a Coke or a Diet Coke or a Dr. Pepper or a 7 Up. It's cost of living adjustments, COLA. And then, of course, spouse benefits. If you're widowed or widower, you can, calculate those. You'll need internet access, of course, which this generation, y'all all have it, so that's not an issue. The future of Social Security is questionable. To me, it's not. Social Security is a perpetual income plan. We're having Social Security withheld now to pay for people that have already retired or receiving benefits, and so it's been a perpetual fund. There's been some money borrowed from it from treasuries departments. If they would pay that back, there would not be a shortage. We hear about the shortage all the time and that they're going to run out of funds, and people panic and go, well, in 2032 there won't be any money for Social Security. There could be that issue. We'll get back together in 2033 and see if that's the case. I've heard this panic call a few times. They usually increase withholding allowances. Right now, if you make over, I think it's $167,500, no Social Security taxes withheld on that amount over that amount. That I think needs to change. I think there's a lot of people out there making more than $167,000. So I feel like that'd be something they would tweak with. Leave our withholding the same for those of us under that amount. But for those over that amount, they would now have to start having withholding done for all of their salary up to maybe $500,000 or something. That's going to give more money to the fund. So there's ways to increase the money coming in to offset for the money going out. We have so many baby boomers that are retiring. That's the reason it's depleted. Again, like I said, there's been money borrowed from the fund. Um, that needs to be paid back. There's things that go on. So I don't think it's going to fail or fall. I think it will still be there. But I've been wrong on a couple of things. So I could be wrong on this, but I just kind of feel like so many people rely on Social Security and so many people only have Social Security. They don't have anything else to retire on. So I don't think it's something that they can just say, we're done, and walk away from without a huge problem and uprising. There's other public pension plans out there. If you've been a government employee, there may be a retirement plan with depending on how long you were in the service or in a government employee job. Railroad uh, employees, they have their own plan and they're not covered by Social Security. So, that could make a difference too. And some federal government jobs don't have Social Security benefits allowed them either. So, it just depends on where you work and what you're doing. Um, the types of plans that are out there. This is where it's going to get a little hairy, but bear with me. There are these are employer plans. So these are plans your employer could have, and they break into two categories: defined contribution, which means it has a definite contribution, or defined benefit, which means it has a defined benefit it's going to pay out when you retire. Most of the plans we deal with, 401ks, etc., profit sharings, they fall under defined contribution. They define how the contribution is that'll go into the plan. So there's individual accounts, IRAs can fall, or individual accounts for small businesses, etc. Those are defined contribution because they're telling you every year you can put in, like with your IRA, 2,000, 5,000, 7,000. There's a defined amount that you can put up to. Doesn't mean that's what you have to put in. It just means that's what you can put in. Money purchase pension plans. A lot of companies have gone away from those and then swung back to them. Back in the day, when retirement plans started, first of all, there was just defined benefit plans where you had to have a defined benefit. And usually that was like your last 3 years salary average was what you were paid in retirement because they tried to take your top 3 years. And so they paid you a definite benefit. So basically your salary continued. And a lot of times they calculated it to be the net salary or your take home pay versus your whole salary or whatever. But it was paying you a specific benefit. So it was paying a defined benefit. Then the laws changed and they could let employers put in what they called a profit sharing plan, was the first one. And that meant if you had profits that year, you could give your employees a bonus and a thank you for working hard and give them a contribution to their retirement. There was no defined amount, there was just a defined limit. And so that's why it was a defined contribution. You could put in 10% of their pay, 20% of their pay. You could put in $20,000 for them all to share. So there, it didn't matter what you put in. It was shared equally, and you as the employer could decide that amount. Then they decided that kind of was great, but it didn't necessarily cover everybody, and it wasn't a whole lot. So they put in money purchase pension plans. And those meant you as an employee contribute, the employer matched it. Most employer money purchase pension plans that started, you'd put in 2 or 3%, the employer would match it with, 4 or 6%. They usually doubled it and did that. So those went in, and then a lot of companies had both money purchase and profit sharing because they had a set benefit to pay in, but that they had a great year with profits, they could throw some of their profits in, and it helps them because they're not being taxed on it and they're providing a benefit, so they get some write-offs. They could put a profit sharing plan in, and then you would share on the profits for that year. So those two plans went together for a long time. Then employers decided, well, what about our stock? We could pay our employees in stock. And so then they started having what they call a stock bonus plan. So instead of paying you in dollars, they could pay you in stock shares. So you'd have this separate plan, separate from a money purchase or a profit sharing, because you're dealing with stock, not dollars. And they would put in, a couple of shares or something like that. When I was in banking, back in the day, they paid out bonuses in stock. They had a money purchase plan, and then they paid bonuses with stock versus having a profit sharing plan. So when I left the employment, I had, quite a few shares of bank stock at that time, that had been changed over 27,000 times from being purchased. But that's how they paid employer, and that's so rewarding for employee too, because you're sharing in the company profits. You're now a stockholder, etc. So those are all defined contribution plans. Then along came, we want to have something that has the pluses of employee contributions, but the perks of having a profit sharing plan, and I don't want to have two plans. So 401ks were born. They kind of modeled 403bs were set up kind of like 401ks, and 457 plans were also, but they were for governmental entities. So you had to be a governmental entity to have either one of those two plans. So 401k came in the scene, and I mean, it hit gangbusters because you could require your employee to put in with the definition in the plan. You didn't have to match it dollar for dollar or $2 for dollar. You could do a half a dollar for dollar, and employers loved that because then they weren't locked into this huge contribution each year. They could, say, well, I'm going to put in 50 cents for every dollar you put in. And sometimes it's 50 cents for every $5 you put in. But regardless, I'm going to put in something. And then if we have profits, and then if we have something else, we'll contribute the profits to that plan also. So they could have everything under one roof and have, quote unquote, the best of both worlds. So those hit the world by storm. It also, when they hit the world by storm, it gave the other two plans, profit sharing money purchase and stock purchase, were all employer driven. The employer made the decision on the investments, and the employers were responsible. They had fiduciary responsibility to make the best return that they felt that they could for the employees. Employees in the 90s and 2000s for sure were ticked at how employers were staying safe with their retirement money, which is not a bad thing. But anyway, they didn't like it. So when 401ks hit the scene and they could combine the money purchase and the profit sharing plan into one, they also added a self-directed investment feature in there. So you could from a usually a team of mutual funds, you could choose your risk level, your reward level, and allocate it how you wanted to. And then that reporting ended up, because they were in mutual funds and with a stockbroker, a lot of times you could check your balances at least monthly. A lot of times you could check them daily with some plans that are out there now. The old money purchase and profit sharing just did a once a year valuation typically, and at the end of the year they told you what it had gained. So people just thought it was much better to know what they had when they had it and do that. I'm not against 401ks in any way, shape, or form. I, of course, because I've worked with the other plans too, see how quickly they add up for retirement. And sometimes it's quicker than letting employees decide their retirement benefits because they get into something that goes belly up. So they didn't have any gains. They're getting match 50 cents for every $5 they put in. So it's not a big match, so it's not that it's bad, it's just that it's not as good. But it works well for the employer and it works well for the employee because they like to be able to control that a little bit more. And like I said, the 403bs and the 457 plans work a lot like that. They may be a little more money purchase oriented plan, but they work where you can direct the investments. You may have your own sub account. Employer sometimes matches, but they're for government plans because government plans weren't allowed to have a profit sharing plan because government entities aren't supposed to have a profit. So they could never have a profit sharing plan. So this gives them a way to kind of get their feet wet. And I think 401ks in the last few years have opened up for government entities also. So, things change all the time, but that's the way the rules were way back in the day. And I only know that because we had a bunch of old plans that were way back in the day that we kept up. And you would think, gosh, why would they do this? And you'd get it explained to you. You go, oh, okay, that makes sense. Why they would set up that kind of a plan. So vesting is something that you'll hear about, you'll learn about, and is on the test also. Vesting is if you that all retirement plans have a vesting schedule. Some will say when you start to work here, you're 100% vested. So there's no big problem there. Some will say, well, we have a high turnover rate, so we're going to make you wait 2 years before you're 20% vested. And what that means is if you're putting money in the plan, you always get that money back. That's 100% yours. But the employer money, they're kind of trying to work on a retention thing here. They want you to stay longer, get more of the employer money, more of the employer interest. So they set up this schedule that after you've worked 2 years, it might be 20%, 3 years, it'd be 40%, 4 years, it'd be 60%. 5 years it'd be 80%, and 6 years you'd get all of it. So that kind of worked with some employee retention. The other plans, profit sharing money purchase, they had those also. So vesting just means how long have you worked before you get a benefit of the employer side. Employee side, like I said, you always get. So like in a profit sharing plan, you're not putting in any money. If you come in and out, somebody with a high turnover rate, they got nothing if they were there under 2 years. But if they were there for 2 years or more, then they got 20, 40, 60% of what the employer was putting in. So that kind of lets you know how that works. Defined benefit, those were all defined contribution. This is defined benefit. Defined benefit, as I said, is a fixed benefit. So it's how much a month you will be paid. And you're told that from the very beginning. Now, they may not tell you the dollar, but they'll tell you it's your 3 highest salaries averaged, or it's your, you know, ending salary paid out to you, or it's the salary you made 5 years before retirement paid out to you. Depending on some of the jobs, if they're very strenuous, they may think when you hit 60, you take a lower paying job to keep with the company, so they would still pay you what you were at the highest point. So they'll define it. They define what that is, and they tell you what that benefit's going to be, and that's their job as the employer to invest it, to make sure it's there, and to calculate. It involves having a actuary. It's very detailed, but they figure out what they have to have on hand in fund now to provide that benefit in the future. So they're using all those tables that we looked at early on with, reversing compound interest and annuity things. If you put in now what it provides at XYZ date, if I invest now, what does it become there? So that's what they were using, all of that kind of stuff to try to calculate that benefit. The employer usually makes the investment decisions because of that feature. So they're figuring out how to make it grow to that. So they're responsible for finding that. But the beauty of it is when you quit employment, you're basically getting either your salary or a portion of your salary paid to you. State employee jobs like state educators and stuff like that, they have a semblance of a defined benefit plan because you're putting in the whole time you're there. The employer's matching the whole time you're there. But then when you retire, they calculate the benefit based on what's been put aside for you and also what your salary is. They have a formula they work through, and then they work on a monthly payout out. So they work on paying you an annuity out to continue monthly benefits for your lifetime or your lifetime and your spouse's or whatever. Now, the book has a comparison of defined benefit and defined contribution plans. Again, I just remember defined benefit defines the benefit. Defined contribution defines what a contribution is that goes in. So that's how I remember, but you can remember however you want. But these just tell you where they break down in that. And then, of course, employee contributions, generally under a defined benefit, there aren't any employee contributions. Employee contributions under defined contribution could be, they're not required, but some plans are. So, and then interest, defined benefit, again, they're taking care of making sure they get that interest returned because they're guaranteeing you the benefit, so you don't have to worry about it. But under defined contributions, the employer often is responsible, but sometimes they pass that responsibility on to you and you become the one that's making that decision for that. The amount of benefits paid on retirement, defined contributions, it's whatever your account balance is. It's whatever you accumulate at the time that you're there. Defined benefit plan, it's your whatever defined, your salary, a portion of your salary, etc. for that time. So that's the reason some people are swinging back to defined benefit plans because they found that the employers loved the defined contribution plans, but then their employees were retiring without enough to live on for 20 or 30 years. So they're swinging back to it. It's not all of them, trust me, but there's been a resurgence in defined benefit plans. People will go, do you know anything about that? I'm going, oh, yeah, we do. We even have an actuary, if he's still alive, that we can put you in touch with because they have to sign off on the filings that you do with the IRS every year for retirement plans. They too have to file returns. And so you have to file a return, and they have to verify that these are what we project the benefits to be. This is where the funding is. And if we earn XYZ interest, we'll make that case. So we're fine. Guarantee of benefits. There's no guarantee of benefits for a defined contribution. Again, if your account becomes $25,000, you're paid $25,000 when you retire. If you start at age 65 and quit at 66 and you have $1,000 in there, your retirement is $1,000. So there's no guarantee of what your retirement will be in a defined contribution plan. But in a defined benefit plan, they will tell you what is your defined benefit for retirement. So And then if you leave the company before your retirement age, which is very possible for almost everyone out there, you have choices. Some plans will make you leave your money with them, depending on the type of plan it is. It may do that. And then at 65, they'll pay you out. They'll keep up with you and make sure they keep your address and those kind of things, and they'll pay you out. But most of the time, plans have become what they call a little more liquid, and they will let you take your money with you. You can roll it over to your new plan. You can put it in an IRA. You can just take it as a distribution. So whatever you want to do, they allow that when you leave employment and are no longer with them. So again, they offer some portability, and the protection comes in that you don't have to take it all as income. If it's $1,000 you have to take as income, you're not going to be too mad. If it's $250,000 that you'd have to take as income, you might be a little ticked. So that's where the portability or being able to roll it over to either a new plan or to an IRA gets that, because then it's still not taxable to you till you take it out. So that's important. And trust me, in the pension world, that's important. There are acts and companies that regulate this in addition to the IRS, Department of Labor. ERISA was an act, and you know how we love acronyms, and that was the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. It was done in 1974, which tells you how long ago this one was passed. But it basically made that that split where you had to have only a defined benefit plan. That was basically when money purchase and profit sharing plans flooded the flood market. And so you could have a different kind of employer plan. Banks got into doing the administration for them, brokerage houses. It was no longer your attorney and an actuary that were responsible for maintaining this plan. You could have it set up with a bunch of different people. And try to get a better return kind of thing if you wanted. It gave a little more direction for employees to be involved, a little more direction for the employers to have some reprieve from having to fund everything all the time. So it was kind of it was a big thing when it passed, for sure. And again, as it says, you can tell it protects more than 50 million workers. So it's an important rule that is still followed today. Now, it's been amended quite a few times since then to do caveats, but that basic rule is still what retirement plans are written for today, is to follow those guidelines. PBGC is a Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, and it's the one that provides retirement plan, the defined benefit plan information and guidance and guarantees. So it's the one that's overseeing the defined benefit plans to make sure that they're meeting all their things. They found that sometimes with defined benefit plans, if you got a crooked employer and a crooked actuary, you might send in the forms that says, we're funding it just fine, and we're going to make all of our benefits, and we'll pay everybody out like we promised, because that's what you're filing, is we're funding it enough to pay these people out if they all had to be paid out. And they found that they were not able to pay everybody out. So the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation kind of stepped in to be kind of provide some insurance, and it provides some guidance in case the plans failed, kind of, so there was a little more recourse for employees that had been promised a certain thing and their employer was just crooked and didn't fund it right. Sometimes there'll be plan audits that they'll come out and audit them to see what the assets are and do the calculations themselves too. So that kind of gives another thing in there. Now, what if you're an individual? What if you don't work for a company? You're self-employed? Self-employed has a few options too. But you always have, as an individual, you can set up an individual retirement account or an IRA. There's regulations and rules with that. If you're in a plan at work, you have specific limits you can't go over, because you can't have both. Both retirement plans, IRAs, and defined contribution plans have added, if you're 50 or older, an additional contribution amount to what they call catch-up contributions. So, and not ketchup and mustard, but catch up. So that you can help make up for some lost time. If you decided you didn't want to start retirement money until you were 40, then it kind of gives you an edge that you can put a little extra aside and get some more saved than you originally planned. The contributions you get a tax deduction for in an IRA. When we did our line item on the budget on our tax form, there was, did you make an IRA contribution? You could take that off, so it reduced your income. But also the earnings that it earns grow tax free, so it's all tax deferred. And then when you take it out, everything is just taxed as regular income. So if you have it in stock and you have dividends and you have gains and you have short term and long term gains and you have interest, you're not paying on any of that until you start taking it out. And then you don't have to track what was dividends, what was interest, what was gains. It's all just taxed as regular income. So that's kind of a nice perk about those things, just because you again, you hope you're at a lower tax bracket and you're just taxed as regular income and not, you don't have to get into all the other things. So it's a nice thing. Roth IRAs hit the market because they realized that some people wanted to have, if you have everything tied up in something that's tax deferred, every time you take a withdrawal, it's taxable. Well, if you have a Roth IRA, you're putting in after tax money. You don't get a deduction for it, but the interest grows and accumulates tax free like an IRA. And then when you start taking it out, um, then you take out your tax-free money because you've already been taxed on it. So it's kind of a best of both worlds. There are some tax breaks for doing a Roth IRA, and of course, again, these are your personal IRA account. So there are a lot of people out there that look at converting their IRA to a Roth IRA. I would always tell you, just get with somebody who knows, because the thing about it, think, oh, I don't want all this, after pre-tax money, and I'm going to be taxed on, my accounts are $500,000 and I'm going to be taxed on every dollar that comes out. True. But if you convert an IRA or your rollover account to a Roth, you're going to be taxed on that when you roll it out. So if you take $500,000 now and roll it to a Roth, no, you won't be taxed in the future on the Roth, but you're taxed today on $500,000. So that's something to keep in mind. And because so many people jumped on that bandwagon and did that, then they've also added a rule that it has to be with the Roth IRA for at least 5 years before you start withdrawing it, or you'll be taxed on it again. So there's some caveats in there you want to be sure of. It is a neat thing. It does offer a neat thing. You might want to split your retirement plan and do that. But just keep in mind that you are taxed on whatever you take out to roll it to that Roth. So it's not like you just get to transfer like your rollover IRA and go, hey, yeah, let's just avoid taxes and then I won't be taxed on it when I take it out. That's not quite how that works. Again, the IRS is going to get their taxes. Just figure out when it's best for you for them to get it. Sometimes people will when they come in and they're looking at rolling their IRA to a Roth, and we have this discussion about taxable income, if they know that they're going to quit their job and not have, they're going to have a year that their income's down before they start doing something else, then that might be a good year to do that, because then you'll have taxable income that year, but it's not like it's adding on to, you have $500,000 income that's taxable, and then you roll your IRA that's 500,000. So now you're at $1,000,000 that's taxable. That could work out fine for you. Just check with your CPA, but it could be that you have a lot of taxes due that year. So again, it's not just a roll it for everybody and everybody does it kind of thing. There's other kinds of IRAs that are out there. There's SEP IRAs, which is Simplified Employee Pension IRAs. Those are for like small employers, and it's basically the employer pays the money, but each person gets like an IRA account. Those have worked really well. We've had a few of those we've worked with through the years. Again, things are taxed as you take them out. I mean, it's the same kind of thing, but it just gives the employers a way to provide you a retirement plan without having to go through all the process of adopting, a big old hairy plan and paying the fees and all that kind of stuff. These are usually a lot cheaper to set up and a lot cheaper to maintain. So it's really kind of nice. Keogh plans you may hear about. Probably won't, just in my world. But Keogh was the senator who passed a rule and a legislature so that self-employed people, self-employed plans, self-employed persons, and their employees could have a retirement plan. Because until then, you had to be a corporation. Well, of course, as all of us know, there's a lot of self-employed people out there. Some are LLCs, some are just self-employed. So this Keogh plan gave them the caveat to have a qualified plan, meet the IRS requirements. You had to file a form annually like everything else. But it gave them, they could set up like a corporate plan, but under the auspices of being a self-employed individual. So it was a really nice feature for them for sure. This is just a comparison of the different kinds of IRAs that are out there. Tells you tax earning, etc. spousal rollover. Rollover IRAs are really good because of you can avoid taxes again on it, and so you're just taxed when it comes out. And then there's what they call education IRAs, where you can put money in, get the tax deferred interest and earnings, get some tax credits now, and then have money saved for education. Employer sponsored plans, of course, retirement, SEPs, IRA, etc. So that just gives you kind of a summary of each one in each plan. I'd go over that just to be sure you've got a good working knowledge on it. Annuities play a part in all this in a couple of ways. Number one, for class purposes, we're looking at annuities as a way to pay somebody out. On the defined benefit plan, I promise you $5,000 a month. I'm going to calculate what I have to put into an annuity for you to pay that $5,000 a month. So that was done a lot of times, and that was taken care of. And that way, we didn't have to keep up with you or where you were. The company did, and it was your account, and you could do with it as you wanted. Now you'll see sometimes they'll use annuities and structured settlements also, because it's you have to pay less cash up front, and the A.G. Whitworth um, ads that you may see on TV. I'm probably the only person that pays attention to ads. Um, but anyway, they look at being able to buy your annuity for what it's worth, give you the cash, which is going to be reduced than what you had in there, and then you don't have to have a monthly payment. And you find that mostly in structured settlements, from like a lawsuit or something like that. But annuities are good because they provide a guaranteed in for life. You can provide it for you and your spouse. um, Annuities. A lot of people, because they're getting into that retirement age, want that structured income, and I want to know I'm getting X dollars a month, especially if you've worked on a budget your whole life and you want to know exactly what you're going to get out of that plan. So that can make a big difference. And so you can, buy them with a single payment. You can have multiple payments going in. They have all the attractions of doing that, and then they can look at paying you monthly, quarterly, annually, however you want to be set up too. So immediate annuities pay right away. A deferred annuity means they're going to pay sometime in the future. So a lot of times you may find annuities deferred in retirement plan investments because they give that same tax advantage. Annuities grow tax free, tax deferred, for retirement purposes, and they may pay a better rate of interest, but you're not planning on getting a monthly payment from it. So you just use it as an investment medium, like a CD or something like that. And then at the end of the term, the 5 years, the 10 years, you cash it in and move it to something else. But you can keep the qualified status. They have all those things that give you that flexibility to do that. And then sometimes they may look at having an annuity, deferred annuity, that they start paying into now at your job to provide you that income down the road because they've calculated how much it would cost them, how much they have to put in over the lifetime of your employment. We had a calculation for that too. If you put in multiple payments to reach the goal of having $500,000 to pay you to then turn around and pay you monthly benefits or pay you $500,000 either way. And so they might be used that way also, to get to your retirement goals. You can decide on your annuity when you get paid out what option is best. The cheapest, the one, it's actually the reverse of that. Ignore I said that. The one that's going to provide you with the most monthly income is what they call a straight life annuity. So if it's just your life, it's just me. I just want it to pay to me. I don't want anything guaranteed. I don't want anything returned. I don't want any, cash paid to beneficiaries or anything like that. I just want pay for my lifetime. That's going to be your largest dollar per month payment to you. Um, if you want, say you're 70 when you start, and you think, well, what if I die next month? I don't want to think all my money went into that and nobody got anything back. You might look at a life with what they call a period certain. You can choose 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And what it means is that's going to pay for those number of years. If I bought it today, died tomorrow, it's going to pay for 10 more years to my beneficiary. So at least somebody's getting something out of that. Down the straight life, if I bought it today, died tomorrow, they get nothing. Insurance company came out well, but my beneficiaries did not. Joint and survivor is another option. That kind of speaks for itself, but it means I'm basically looking at protecting for my life and then my spouse's life. So it's going to pay for my lifetime and my spouse's lifetime. Now you can see why if you go through these calculations and you know how we calculated those benefits before with those tables. you're looking at less income per month, but longer guaranteed periods of paying out. So it just depends on where you fall in. Do I want the most money now, or do I want to make sure that somebody's covered for my lifetime and their lifetime? So it gives you that option for that. And then if you want a cash return, they allow that also. So I'm going to pay for my lifetime, but I want a refund. And what that means is if I lived to 90 and started at 60, there may not be a lot of cash to refund. But if I bought it today and died tomorrow, basically my whole premium should come back. So that would just mean they have to pay back whatever cash is unused. So there's that option also. So there's some choices out there. But again, the one with the most dollar per month benefit is just a straight line annuity, straight life annuity for one lifetime period. These give you the options of why you want to use them. Just, you can read that on your own. I'm not going to read that to you. I have faith in you that you can figure that out yourself. So hopefully trying to figure out how you have enough money in retirement. So now we know we can have retirement plans. We can have an IRA. We can have our employers in retirement plan, which is, I guess, retirement plans. And then we have Social Security. So we've kind of got an idea where we're looking at. So then you can figure out, do you think you'll have enough money? Now, you probably won't want to start figuring this now. I mean, you could, but you probably will start when you get to your 40s. Look at it and see where you're at. What's Social Security looking like per month? What's your retirement plan looking like for a total account balance if you take the past 10 years and add 20 more years to it, kind of thing. Again, future variations, future values are not indicative of the past, but you can still kind of figure that out. And see where you're at and figure out how you want to do it. And so here's a chart that the book gives you for, sources of income. Of course, you have your 401k or your retirement plan. And they broke it down to uh, private sources and government sources. So on the left-hand side, as you look at this, is Social Security, the VA, railroad retirement, state, county governments, those things. Those are your sources there. But you may have a private source that's over to the right. And that could be either an employer plan or a personal plan. And then it gives you the options under that: defined contribution, defined benefit, IRAs, annuities, etc. So, and yes, you could buy an annuity also while you're looking at it. Because we had that annuity calculation thing that we did with the chart. If you were putting in monthly benefits, how much it would be, you could do the same thing. If you know your goal is to have $500,000 at retirement or $1 million at retirement, what do I have to put in now to make it work? Then you could set that up on your own with an annuity and start plugging that money in and buy a deferred annuity. So you can put money in as you go along and then have it grow to that amount. So anyway, to do your retirement income, always make sure you're getting the most that you can. Make sure you're receiving everything that you're entitled to. The book would suggest you develop a spending plan for retirement. I think that's great, but most of us don't do that. But just know that the book says that you should have a spending plan for retirement. And if you have the skills and abilities to do some other things, maybe hire out, do some other jobs. And also, when you're doing all this calculation, if you can do them and you can figure them out, that's great. If you can't, maybe get somebody to help. Because it might help you feel better about retirement if you know kind of what you're walking into with it. Always take advantage of any tax advantage plans that you can. Again, a lot of people work during retirement. It doesn't hurt your Social Security. It can actually increase the benefits going forward. When you invest for retirement, of course, you want to get the most that you can up there, but you also want to make sure it's in something that you can get at. Especially if you're staying in your old home, it may need repairs. So you need to have cash to be able to pull that off. But then you also want to keep up with inflation. That doesn't change. We're doing that as we're younger. We're doing it also in retirement. So that doesn't matter. And then also, a lot of times with clients, we work in the annuity market a lot with our retirement retirees, and we have a lot of them are in deferred annuities. And a lot of times when employees or people come to us and they ask, how much per month can I get with this amount? Well, we'll run it like an annuity figure. We'll get on there and say, if you have $500,000, we're expecting you to live 20 years, what would that provide per month? And we'll get a figure. So a lot of times if they have an annuity, we'll say, why don't we just set up a monthly payment? We won't annuitize it, which means it's locked in. We'll just set up monthly payments that say, they say this would make it to, 20 years. And then that way you have something you can dip into if the roof has an issue, if your car breaks down, if you have something that you need more cash from, we can get it. Now it's going to reduce how long that's going to run. I mean, cash is only cash and it's only limited, but not everything's not locked in. And a lot of times that's what I feel for retirees. They want to know that set dollar amount, so they put everything in something that's paying a guaranteed payment. But you still need to have a nest egg. You still need to have cash that you can get into. So either do that before you do that, or make one of them that you can access and get cash out over and above what you're being paid. Because unexpected things happen. I mean, that's just life. So you want to be sure you've got that. This just tells you how much of a nest egg you need, how much you need to set aside to have that kind of a nest egg for 10 years, 15 years, etc. So again, it just gives you gives you a goal in life to figure out where you need to be. Okay, that is retirement planning, basically in a nutshell. Trust me, there's a lot more we could go into, but if you have questions, of course, give me a holler and let me know. And I appreciate your time.